Dear viewers, thank you for joining me in the latest Manitowoc History Review video. This video will tell the story of Manitowoc's only one armed police officer. Jeremiah Reardon, a Civil War veteran, would lose his left arm in battle. The loss of his arm did not stop him, and for the rest of his life he would work at a number of different occupations, including almost 9 years as a police officer on the Manitowoc Police Department and later a ward constable. So let's begin our story. The Manitowoc Police Department has had well over 250 police officers during its 150-year history. But during that time, only one of them has policed the streets of Manitowoc with only one arm. That man was Jeremiah Francis Reardon. Reardon was not born that way. At the time of his birth on June 3, 1843 in Lowell, Massachusetts, he had two well-developed arms which he would retain for the next 21 years. Jeremiah, along with his parents Michael and Mary Reardon, came to Manitowoc County in 1858, where they operated a farm in Kossuth Township. When the American Civil War broke out in April 1861, Jeremiah, like all young men of the day, wanted to enlist at once but decided to remain on the farm until the country was in real need of men to fight the war. That call came in 1862 when President Lincoln put out his call for 100,000 additional troops to fight the war. On August 16, 1862, Jeremiah enlisted as a private in Company K of the 21st Wisconsin Infantry Regiment. Over the next year and a half, Jeremiah and the 21st Wisconsin would see extensive fighting at the battles of Perryville, Stone River, Hoover's Gap, and Chickamauga. On May 14, 1864, the Union Army met Confederate forces head-on at a place called Resaca, Georgia. The 21st Wisconsin was hotly engaged, and as they advanced under fire while fording a deep, wide creek, Jeremiah was hit by a Confederate minie-ball in the elbow of his left arm. The force of the minie-ball knocked Jeremiah off his feet and into the deep creek. He struggled to gain his footing, but because of the fast-moving current in the creek and the loss of blood from his wound, he was unable to keep his head above the water for more than a few seconds at a time. Jeremiah's story would have ended there if it had not been for an American Indian. That Indian was a young man by the name of Moses Ladd. Moses was the son of an Englishman and a mother who was a full-blooded Menominee Indian. Like Jeremiah, Moses had enlisted in Company B, 21st Wisconsin on August 15, 1862. When Moses saw that Jeremiah was unable to save himself, he, still under heavy Confederate fire, helped Jeremiah to the bank of the creek, where he laid him down and gave him a drink from his canteen. Moses then continued on with the rest of his company. Moses Ladd would become famous later in the war. During General William T. Sherman's march to the sea, Moses became Sherman's chief scout. He performed his job so well that he and Sherman became good friends. After the war, Sherman visited Wisconsin a number of times, and the first person he requested to see was always his friend Moses Ladd. Jeremiah, with the aid of fellow soldiers, was able to make his way to the 21st Regimental Aid Station. Their doctors took one look at the arm and said it couldn't be saved. The minie-ball had entered the elbow, shattering the bone into many pieces, making it impossible to repair the damage. In other words, the arm as it was useless. That very afternoon the left arm was amputated just above the elbow joint. After the arm was removed, the stump was bandaged and Jeremiah was sent on to a military hospital at Chattanooga, Tennessee for recovery. The sad fact was that many soldiers who had arms or legs amputated did not survive. Not because surgeons did a poor job, but because they did not understand wounds of that type becoming infected. Such was the case with Jeremiah. Within a week, the area where the arm was amputated became infected to the point that Jeremiah's life was once again in danger. Gangrene had set in, so surgeons at the hospital decided to remove another section of the arm in hopes of stopping the infection from spreading farther. This was done and left the stump now about 5 inches from the armpit. The healing process did not go well, and within time the infection once again began to spread. Once again, surgeons decided to remove another section of the arm. This time an inch was removed, leaving a stump of around 4 inches. This time the operation was successful and the arm, what was left of it, began to heal. Still, it would take many months for Jeremiah to recover from his 3 operations. By October 19, 1864, Jeremiah had recovered enough to be transferred to the Harvey USA General Hospital in Madison, Wisconsin. He remained there until February 20, 1865, when he was transferred to a War Department hospital in Prairie du Chien, Wisconsin. On May 26, 1865, while still a patient at the military hospital in Prairie du Chien, Reardon was discharged from the military on a surgeon's certificate of disability. Jeremiah returned to Manitowoc late in 1865. It was a time of adjustment for the now one-armed veteran. It is believed that his father had passed away while Jeremiah was in service, although there is no record of his death or a listed place of burial. Jeremiah's mother had moved into Manitowoc from the family farm and was living with her daughter Edna. For a time, Jeremiah moved in with his mother and sister and continued the recovery process, which took time before he was able to adjust to life with only one arm. Over the next few years, he worked in businesses that did not require heavy lifting. It was during this time that he conceived the idea of starting his own business. That idea was put into practice on June 29, 1871, when he opened the Reardon Confectionery on North 8th Street in Manitowoc. The confectionery was stocked with confection items such as sweet food heavy in sugar like candies, which included lollipops, bonbons, fudges, and baked goods. Other items that lined the shelves of his store were pipes, tobacco, fresh fruits, nuts, dried fruit, spices, Yankee notions, perfume, neckties, and fireworks. Jeremiah's ad could be found in the weekly newspapers that served the citizens of Manitowoc. Just 1 year after opening his confectionery, Jeremiah married Mary Elizabeth Howarth. During their marriage, the couple would have 2 daughters. Running a confectionery in Manitowoc in the 1870s was not a bad business. One could make a very good living in such a business, but in 1876 Jeremiah was offered a job on the Manitowoc Police Department that he couldn't pass up. The village of Manitowoc had been incorporated into a city in 1870s. The police department at that time consisted of 3 men. Since then the city had grown and an additional officer was needed to man the department. Jeremiah was offered a job of what was then called a night watchman. The police chief in 1876 was Hugh Morrison. Serving under him would be C. Schmalfeld, If. Mankey, and Jeremiah Reardon. Morrison's salary was $41.66 a month, while each night watchman received $29.16 a month. Morrison and Schmalfeld worked the day shift, while Mankey and Reardon worked the night shift. Each officer was expected to work a 12-hour shift, 30 days a month with 1 day off per month. It was a tough schedule, but these were tough men in difficult times. Of course, the question was asked, could Jeremiah Reardon, a man with only one arm, do the job required of a police officer? Jeremiah had no doubt and would prove himself over the coming years. Newspaper accounts recorded stories of his bravery such as these. February 12, 1880. Jeremiah Reardon comes to the aid of fellow officer. An officer, while conveying a disorderly person to jail on Tuesday night, was struck by the disorderly person in the teeth with a knife. Jerry Reardon put in an appearance at this juncture and subdued the subject, who was promptly locked up. Or an article that appeared to the Manitowoc Pilot on June 22, 1882. Jerry Reardon picked up a hoodlum on Saturday for being drunk and disorderly. The fellow had been boasting that he came from New York and was in the habit of getting the drop on those who interfered with his enjoyment. Jerry found it necessary to play with the fellow's windpipe before he agreed to go peaceably to the jail. It was Jeremiah's job to patrol the streets of Manitowoc at night, on foot, looking for signs of trouble or anything out of order. There is little doubt that he could do the job required of him. Unfortunately for Jeremiah, when a police officer does his job, and does it well, they make enemies. Such was the case with Jeremiah. He did not back down when required to enforce the letter of the law. This of course caused problems with some of the powerful citizens of the city who desired to see him gone. Things came to a head in 1885. Each year the contract of each police officer had to be renewed by the city council. These names were submitted to the mayor by the chief of police, who, if he agreed, passed then on to the city council. That year George Pankratz, a powerful Democratic mayor, removed Jeremiah's name from the list. Of course, the fact that Jeremiah was a staunch Republican had nothing to do with his removal from the department. At least that's what they said. Instead, they used the excuse that a one-armed police officer could not do the job required by the city. While Jeremiah had enemies, he also had many friends in the city, especially his fellow Civil War veterans and the many citizens he had helped during his 9 years on the police department. For a time the city was in an uproar over Jeremiah's dismissal from the police department, but there was little they could do. The decision had been made and confirmed by the city council. That did not stop Jeremiah. The following year he ran for constable in his ward. His election was overwhelming. He was once again enforcing the laws and ordinances of the city. He would hold the position of constable for the next 10 years. At the time, the job of constable was not a paid position. They could submit a request for reimbursement for any expenses they incurred but were not paid for their services. No longer working for the city, Jeremiah needed employment to support his wife and 2 children. That opportunity came shortly after leaving the police department. In 1883, a number of prominent citizens entertained the idea of establishing a bathhouse along the Manitowoc River. We must remember that in 1883 the waters of the Manitowoc River were still very clear, cool, and ideal for swimming. The bathhouse they had in mind was more than a place to change into a swimming suit. It was more or less a social club. Individuals could buy shares in the bathhouse, which was designed to make a profit. At certain times the bathhouse was open to the public, who were required to pay a fee to use the facility. It took 2 years, but by 1885 the bathhouse had been built on the island just beyond the first bend in the river. But the bathhouse needed someone to be in charge. Someone to collect the money for rented swimsuits and towels and use of the bathhouse. Jeremiah applied for the job and was accepted, mostly because he could be counted on to keep the facility orderly. The bathhouse was a great success, with many Manitowoc citizens using the facility during the hot summer months. Of course, men and women were not allowed to swim together. Ladies could swim only in the morning, while the men could swim in the afternoon and evening. The Bathhouse Association also sponsored swim meets with races from the bathhouse to the shore of Lake Michigan. To everyone's surprise, one of the best swimmers in the community was Jeremiah Reardon. Even with just 1 arm, he could swim like a fish. This was recorded in the July 8th issue of the Manitowoc Pilot. It stated, "Jerry Reardon, though he has but 1 arm, is said to be the most expert swimmer in the city." Jeremiah's dream job came to an end in the spring of 1888 when a large embankment of ice built up on the upper Manitowoc River. When the ice let loose, it caused a flood downriver. The ice and flood waters picked up the bathhouse and carried it out into Lake Michigan. There was talk of rebuilding the bathhouse on the island, but that was never done. Jeremiah also took on the job of custodian for the First Presbyterian Church, the church that he and his family attended. He would serve in that capacity from 1886 until 1908. Jeremiah was also active in community affairs, including the G.A.R., or Grand Army of the Republic. For those not familiar with the G.A.R., it was the first veterans group established in the United States. It was the forerunner of groups such as the VFW, American Legion, AMVETS, and Vietnam Veterans of American. During his time in the G.A.R., Jeremiah would serve as post commander several times and would attend many of the state and national G.A.R. encampments. Sadly, Jeremiah would pass away on October 11, 1915. He would be carried to his grave in Evergreen Cemetery by his fellow members of the Grand Army of the Republic. He is buried in Lot A12-5. The Manitowoc Police Department can truly be proud to say that they once had a 1-armed officer on their department.